Imagine spending, I don't know, millions of dollars to collect this massive mountain of real-world data. And this data proves your medical device is perfectly safe out in the wild.
Right.
But then, when you actually try to hand that data over to the FDA, you're told that submitting it would practically violate international privacy laws.
Which is just a regulatory nightmare.
Exactly. It's this impossible paradox. And for years, medical device sponsors have been completely trapped by it. But today, we're breaking down the December 2025 FDA guidance that, frankly, just handed the industry a sledgehammer to smash right through that wall. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, you're absolutely right. This is a massive structural change for anyone listening who works in the medtech or life sciences space.
Yeah, and we are custom tailoring today's deep dive specifically for you, the senior QA and RA leaders out there.
Right, because you are the ones who have to actually build this out. So we're looking at the finalized guidance. It's officially titled Use of Real-World Evidence to Support Regulatory Decision-Making for Medical Devices.
Which officially supersedes the older, much-debated 2017 framework, right?
Yes, exactly. What the agency has done here is they've basically reflected on nearly a decade of hard lessons from administrative reviews. They are fundamentally rewriting how life sciences companies have to approach regulatory submissions from here on out.
So to really get into the nuts and bolts of this new guidance, I think we should run a hypothetical case study through our entire conversation today. Keep things grounded.
I love that. What do you have in mind?
Let's imagine you are a company that manufactures an AI-enabled continuous glucose monitor, a CGM.
Okay, very topical.
Right, so you have your initial FDA clearance for adults with type 2 diabetes, but now you want to expand your label to include teenagers with type 1 diabetes.
That is a perfect scenario because it perfectly highlights the fundamental difference between traditional trials and the actual real world. In the regulatory world, we differentiate between real-world data, RWD, and real-world evidence, or RWE.
Right, the data versus the evidence.
Exactly. So real-world data is just the raw material. It's the data routinely collected during patient care. We're talking, electronic health records, administrative claims, data from registries.
And in the case of our hypothetical CGM, the actual biometric data literally streaming from the patient's wearable device.
Yes, that's the RWD. The real-world evidence, the RWE, is what you actually build from that raw material. It's the clinical evidence regarding the CGM's usage, or its benefits, its risks, and it's derived from a really rigorous analysis of that raw data.
And just to set the stage before we get into the new rules, why is the FDA and the whole industry pushing so hard for RWE right now? I mean, traditional clinical trials have been the gold standard forever.
Well, they have, but traditional, highly controlled clinical trials have some severe limitations. I mean, they are fantastic for proving basic safety and efficacy in a vacuum.
Right. I always think of traditional trial data like studying a plant in a highly controlled artificial greenhouse. You dictate the soil, the water, the temperature, everything.
Yes, exactly.
But real-world evidence is like finally getting to see how that exact same plant survives out in the actual jungle.
That is a brilliant analogy. The FDA desperately wants to understand those jungle dynamics. Because think about a traditional clinical trial for our AI-enabled CGM. You enroll a very specific demographic of patients.
Right.
They get heavy monitoring. They have dedicated study coordinators calling them constantly to ensure they calibrate the device properly.
Which does not reflect reality at all.
Right.
It doesn't reflect a busy, high school student playing soccer who forgets to calibrate their sensor, eats erratically, and drops their phone in a puddle.
Not even a little bit. And RWE captures those broader clinical experiences. It vastly improves the generalizability of the data. You actually get to see how the device performs across highly diverse populations, varying comorbidities, unstructured environments.
It spans the whole life cycle, right?
Right. It allows for continuous long-term tracking across what the FDA calls the total product life cycle, or TPLC.
Plus, there's a massive technological urgency here, especially with our hypothetical AI device. Because AI and machine learning algorithms, they aren't static.
No, they evolve constantly.
Exactly. So a highly controlled greenhouse trial from 3 years ago tells an FDA reviewer absolutely nothing about how that algorithm is behaving out in the wild today.
Spot on. And from a strategic perspective for the sponsors listening, utilizing RWE significantly reduces your time to market for innovative devices. Or, like in our example for indication expansions, moving the CGM from adults to teenagers.
Because you're leveraging data that already exists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rather than spinning up a multi-year, multi-million-dollar prospective trial from scratch.
Okay, so if the jungle offers these incredible insights, and it saves sponsors literally millions of dollars. Why haven't QA and RA teams just been utilizing it heavily all along?
Well, because the jungle is incredibly messy.
Fair point.
Navigating that mess historically presented two massive roadblocks for sponsors. First, just the fundamental nature of observational data. You're dealing with missing data, fragmented data standards, and totally inconsistent entry across different health systems.
Right, like a physician in New York coding a glycemic event completely differently than a physician in London.
Yeah, exactly. And beyond just missing data, observational data inherently introduces confounding factors and bias.
How so?
Well, in a randomized controlled trial, you mathematically control for bias. But in the real world, let's say an endocrinologist only prescribes our advanced AI CGM to their absolute most brittle, highest risk patients.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. So if the real-world data shows a higher rate of hypoglycemic events for our device compared to a competitor, is our device actually less safe? Or were our patients simply sicker to begin with?
Wow, yeah, that confounding factor totally muddies the water. But as I was reviewing the DAG 10 2025 guidance, data messiness wasn't even the primary bottleneck that stalled the industry, was it?
No, it wasn't. The barrier that truly handcuffed QA and RA leaders was the strict privacy constraints.
This brings us right back to the impossible paradox we talked about at the beginning.
Yes, this was the fatal flaw in the previous 2017 framework. Previous FDA expectations practically mandated that your RWE submissions had to include private, confidential information at the individual patient level.
Wait, they wanted the raw patient data.
Yes. The agency wanted to physically inspect the raw participant-level data to verify the sponsor's safety claims.
So QA and RA teams were being told by the agency to gather these massive real-world data sets to prove long-term safety.
Right.
But when they attempted to hand that macro-level data over, they were penalized by completely impossible privacy expectations.
Exactly. Trying to maintain and submit large databases while navigating international privacy safeguards, think GDPR and HIPAA, all to provide individual-level traceability to the FDA. It was operationally and financially crippling.
Just a total gridlock.
Right. Sponsors simply could not maintain the data in a format the FDA would accept without exposing themselves to massive legal liability. And this regulatory gridlock was literally keeping better devices out of patients' hands.
So how does the December 2025 guidance actually fix this?
The FDA finally recognized the issue. The new guidance was engineered specifically to break that paradox. And the monumental shift, the big headline here, is that the FDA explicitly eliminated the requirement for individual-level confidential data in these submissions.
Oh, wow. That is huge.
It's massive. De-identified, aggregate, and even international data sets are now officially highly viable for regulatory use.
Okay, wait, hold on, though. Let me play devil's advocate. If the FDA can't see the underlying patient data anymore, how do they know a sponsor didn't just, I don't know, cherry-pick the good outcomes? Doesn't removing that raw data requirement make it incredibly easy for a company to hide safety issues?
And that right there is the exact tension the new guidance addresses. Because the FDA absolutely did not lower their standards for scientific rigor. Instead, they radically shifted the burden of proof.
Okay, so how does that work?
Because the FDA can no longer directly inspect that raw, participant-level data to catch cherry-picking, the burden of proving trustworthiness shifts entirely to your documentation as the sponsor. The agency now evaluates RWE strictly on a case-by-case basis through two unyielding pillars, relevance and reliability.
Relevance and reliability.
Yes. These are the defense mechanisms against the exact kind of fraud you were just talking about.
So if I'm understanding this right, it feels like the FDA didn't lower the bar, they just changed the locks.
Oh, I like that.
Like, you don't need to hand over the patient's exact name and address anymore, but you need an absolutely airtight, audit-ready receipt of exactly where that data came from and how it was handled, right?
Change the locks captures the regulatory mindset perfectly. So let's look at that first lock, relevance. Relevance evaluates whether your data set is actually capable of answering the specific regulatory question you are asking. The FDA heavily scrutinizes clinical depth here. They want to know, does the data set actually contain the clinical or physiological measures needed to demonstrate safety or effectiveness?
So applying that to our CGM case study, it's not enough to just pull billing codes showing a teenager went to the hospital for diabetes management.
Exactly. Billing codes aren't enough.
You would need the specific continuous glucose values, the time and range metrics, the actual A1C lab results to prove the device worked.
Precisely. They also examine temporal alignment. Is the data from a relevant time frame that reflects the current standard of care? Because, medical practices change rapidly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then they heavily scrutinize population representativeness. Does this data actually reflect the target population for your device in the U.S.?
So if our CGM company pulls real-world data from a massive registry in Europe.
Right. They must rigorously document the limitations of that European data and scientifically justify why European dietary and clinical practices legitimately apply to U.S. teenagers.
Okay, that covers relevance. Does the data fit the question? So the second pillar, reliability, that seems to be where the airtight receipt really comes into play.
Yes. Reliability dictates the mechanics of the data. How was it generated? How was it curated, processed, and validated? This covers data integrity, completeness, consistency.
So you have to show your work.
Completely. You must provide a very clear audit trail documenting data provenance, your collection methods, your quality controls. You literally have to explicitly show the statistical methods you use to address missing or inconsistent data.
To ensure you aren't just conveniently ignoring unfavorable outcomes.
Exactly. And the FDA didn't just issue these philosophical pillars and leave it up to industry interpretation.
Right, they introduced highly specific procedural updates for how QA and RE leaders actually have to package this proof.
Yes. The 2025 guidance mandates standardized submission expectations. This is to ensure consistency across all FDA review teams. So your regulatory submission cover letters must now explicitly state that the application contains RWE.
It has to be right on the cover.
Front and center. You must specify the study design, the primary objective of using the RWE, and exact details of the data sources. The name of the registry, the provider, the version, extraction dates, every tiny detail.
And then there's this brand new dedicated report that sponsors have to generate, right?
Yes, the relevance and reliability report. Sponsors submit this dedicated document detailing their entire data quality assessment. And to facilitate this, the FDA introduced a really vital, practical tool, the Appendix A documentation checklist.
Let's focus on Appendix A for a second, because when I was reading it, it essentially operates like a treasure map or like GPS coordinates for the FDA reviewer.
That's a great way to think about it.
Instead of making an FDA reviewer dig through a 5,000-page PDF trying to find where you handled missing data, Appendix A literally forces you to provide the exact page, paragraph, and line containing the proof of your data's reliability.
It forces structured transparency. You are basically mapping the exact location of your data dictionaries, your linkage methodologies, your validation steps.
And didn't they update the submission software too?
They did. The FDA updated the electronic submission template and resource forms, known as eStar, in tandem with this guidance to natively integrate these RWE reporting recommendations. It just standardizes the entire pathway.
Now, there is one more crucial regulatory clarification in the guidance that we need to hit regarding investigational device exemptions, or IDEs.
Oh, yeah. This caused widespread confusion under the old rules.
Because companies didn't know if they needed an IDE just to look at old data.
Right. So the new guidance clarifies that retrospective analyses of real-world data typically do not require an IDE. The caveat is, unless the data collection process itself alters standard patient care.
Okay, so if our CGM company is just looking back at wearable data and EHR data that was already routinely collected during normal daily life and standard clinic visits,
then they generally do not need an IDE to analyze it. The guidance even provides hypothetical examples to really help sponsors navigate that boundary of what constitutes altering patient care.
which removes a mountain of administrative friction for retrospective studies.
Absolutely a mountain.
Okay, so we understand the mechanics of the guidance now. Let's translate this high-level policy into a Tuesday morning reality for the QA and RA leaders listening. How do you actually execute this architecture? We reviewed some highly strategic lessons from industry experts at Castor and IQVIA on operationalizing this.
Right, and Castor's main point is something every leader needs to hear. They fundamentally argue that medtech organizations must stop treating post-market surveillance as a static compliance exercise.
Like a box to check.
Exactly. Historically, companies would just build a basic, cheap registry solely to satisfy a post-market surveillance requirement from the FDA. It was viewed as a sunk cost.
But a registry designed solely for that purpose captures zero downstream value.
Zero.
So, let me ask you this. If a QA or RA leader listening is building a basic database right now just to check a compliance box, are they essentially throwing away a golden ticket for their product's future life cycle?
Yes. you are burning a potential strategic asset. Castor's directive is that registries must be built on interoperable, pseudonymized infrastructures from day one. You need to capture direct-to-patient outcomes prospectively.
Let's break down what that actually means mechanically. We're talking about capturing electronic patient-reported outcomes, or EPRO.
Right.
This means our hypothetical CGM company isn't waiting for a teenager to visit a clinic every 6 months to lazily fill out a paper survey. They are actively pinging the patient's smartphone app to ask about their dietary inputs or symptoms in real time.
Yes, exactly. And by integrating that EPRO data with a pseudonymized infrastructure, you are completely protecting the patient's protected health information. But crucially, you're still maintaining the investigator-level audit trail the FDA now demands.
So it's a win-win.
It is. If you build that data asset correctly for your initial post-market compliance, you can reuse that exact same data asset 3 years later to support your label expansion to teenagers, without starting from scratch with a massive new clinical trial.
That is incredible. Now, moving to IQVIA's lesson, they leaned heavily into the mechanics of transparency and advanced privacy.
Right, because, again, the FDA is not inspecting your raw data to look for cherry picking anymore. Your documentation carries the entire burden.
So how do you prove that trustworthiness technically?
IQVIA emphasizes rigorous validation studies. You absolutely must run sensitivity analyses to demonstrate how robust your findings are against potential confounding variables. And you need crystal clear endpoint definitions.
Like if you use surrogate endpoints because you can't observe the primary endpoint directly in the real world.
Exactly. If you use a surrogate endpoint, your scientific justification for doing so has to be flawless.
IQVIA also pointed to advanced privacy-preserving techniques like tokenization. Now, the concept of linking disparate data sets without exposing identity sounds like literal magic to a lot of people.
It really does.
How does tokenization actually work mechanically?
Okay, so tokenization uses cryptographic algorithms to replace a patient's personally identifiable information, like their name and date of birth, with a random string of characters. That string is known as a token.
Okay.
Let's say our CGM company wants to link their wearable app data with a massive national insurance claims database. They want to see if their device actually reduces emergency room visits for teens.
But they can't share names.
Right. But because the CGM cloud server and the insurance company use the exact same encryption key, they mathematically generate the exact same cryptographic token for our hypothetical teenager.
Oh, wow.
So the sponsor just matches the CGM data to the hospital claims data using that random token. It creates a complete longitudinal picture of the patient's journey without anyone ever actually knowing the patient's identity.
That is brilliant. It builds the exact comprehensive RWE architecture the FDA wants while remaining fully compliant with global privacy laws.
It's elegant.
Yeah.
But, and this is a big but, a sponsor cannot just drop a massive tokenized data set on an FDA reviewer's desk and just hope they accept the methodology.
Right, which leads to IQVIA's most critical strategic advice.
Yeah.
Engage the FDA early.
Yes. Because RWE acceptability is strictly evaluated case by case, pre-submission discussions are non-negotiable.
So if you are listening to this and you are preparing for a Q submission meeting next month, do not walk into that room with just a vague idea of using tokenized registry data.
Please don't.
You need to walk in with your endpoint strategy already mapped out, knowing exactly how you are dealing with missing EHR data.
If you wait for the FDA to tell you how to clean your data, you have already lost 6 months of your timeline.
At least 6 months. Proactive interaction is the only viable path. You use the Q submission process to ask regulators highly specific, targeted questions about your study protocol and your relevance and reliability assessments.
Get alignment before you build.
Exactly. You must align with regulators on your data sources, your validation plans, and evidentiary standards before you invest millions into the architecture. All right, to sum all of this up, the December 2025 FDA guidance on real-world evidence really is a profound regulatory evolution. It hands the industry unprecedented flexibility by officially removing the requirement for individual-level confidential data. It fully allows the use of macro-level, de-identified data sets.
But that flexibility demands unyielding standards for scientific rigor. The burden of proof now rests entirely on your documentation. You have to definitively prove relevance, that the data fits the clinical question, and reliability, that the data was generated and handled impeccably.
And you have to master the new standardized packaging, like the Appendix A checklist, the relevance and reliability report, and that native eStar integration.
As a senior KRA leader, your immediate takeaway should be to audit your current data architecture. Treating post-market data as a reusable strategic asset rather than just a compliance burden is the absolute key to accelerating your future device approvals.
RWE has clearly transitioned from a nice-to-have supplementary file to a core pillar of regulatory strategy across the entire total product lifecycle.
100%.
Well, I want to leave you, our listeners, with a final, somewhat provocative thought as you review your current regulatory pipelines this week. The FDA is aggressively removing barriers to de-identified real-world data. They are heavily encouraging its use across the product lifecycle, especially to monitor AI-enabled devices that are constantly learning and adapting in the wild. As these RWE data infrastructures become more sophisticated, more seamlessly tokenized, and more deeply integrated into the global healthcare system, how long will it be until traditional, highly controlled pre-market clinical trials become the exception rather than the rule for medical device approvals?
It's a great question.
Definitely something to think about as you design your next registry. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.